sharing knowledge. Maybe if anybody here can add, please, it's very welcome. The next slide. For sustainable research, we need sustainable resource of samples, and it can be come from, if it's only institutional, maybe it's not too complicated, but if you have other sample resources in other institutions and you want to collaborate to extend your research, then sample quality will be also issue here. To extend our research collaborations, it's better to have like a national or international network in Biobank, and here the sample quality and data quality become a problem we should address. We want to make sure that sample that we want to use from one biobank to other biobank has the same standard. Otherwise, your research will not speak loudly, or it doesn't give a great impact, because it has different standard in processing or handling or maybe transporting the samples and so on. The next slide. So that's why we need to have good quality samples, since the samples might be different sample in collecting the samples, in processing, or even to store the sample. The procedure maybe have variations in each biobank, and also the data and the IT system maybe will be different, and then the consents of different things and condition for access will be also different, and also the legal ethic frameworks will also different. So we want to make sure that the samples that we want to use for research is something that is interoperable. So it has to be able to be used. The next slide. So what it mean by this interoperability? So it's the ability of different system and organizations in here Biobank can work together. So it will give the researcher opportunity to use samples without no worry, sample and of course the data from one provider. In here it's Biobank, so from one biobank to other biobank, to use the samples from these providers, because the samples they provide has the same standard. Next slide. So that's why what we have to do about these samples, of course we need to make sure the quality by make a good standard for Biobank. So it's better to have same standard for all Biobank, and also harmonizations, and we better to have best practice here. So if everybody has practices and good guidelines to start their Biobank, for sure that the sample they collected can be shared with other party. Next slide. This is some definitions about the standardizations. Maybe it's the definition can be the formal process to establish management or technical standard, and everything should be documented. So as Bu Jajah already present previously also, that if it's not documented then it's nothing, because it cannot be traced. You don't know how the process of the sample previously, so it's difficult to know the quality of the samples. And then best practice or consensus in handling, in processing and store the sample will be also important. And this if it's wants to be like formalized, needs to be certified or accredited by the party which has competency to do these accreditations or certifications. In here, for example, for if it's standardized by ISO, yeah, or WHO, for examples. The next slide. And then how about harmonization? Why it's biobank need to have this harmonization of the sample or data that they have? Because it's kind of agreement so that all procedure and practice that is apply in that biobank is interoperable, so that it can be used by researchers at the same time for their research. So they can harmonize the data and the samples. They can create large number of sample for the research. So it will give great impact. And then the agreement can be regarding the standard, how to handle the samples, how to process it, how to store it, and the method, and maybe the practice that's used in that biobank. Next slide. This is best practice or guideline. It can be, I think it's nowadays it's available online. You can search it also. Usually that we use the best practice commonly used is BEAR. Yeah, it includes the process, technique, method, how we can start a good biobank based on this best practice. So at least we can start it with the very good with the nice systems or already established by previous biobank, which we know that it's already proved that it's good. It's BEAR. Next slide. Yes, for quality control, yeah, we need to do some tests to make sure that the process in our biobank is correct one, and the result also what we expected. Next slide. This is the slides that do we have pointer? Okay. Yeah. For this is a scheme that showing that process before we analyze the samples. There is a pre-analytical process here that may affect the quality of the samples here during the analysis. That will influence the post-analytical result. So some factors that may influence the result of the samples that we have. We may consider the patient itself, the factor of the patient. For example, that patient has unique characteristic with specific disease, with patient's pathological status, for example. That patients itself have some issues to be recorded. And then other factors, for example, the samples itself, how we collect the samples, it will affect the quality of the samples, how we identify the samples, make identifications, and the protocol, how we collect the samples, and the transport also, whether there is delay or the temperature when we transport the sample to our biobank, since removal in the operation theater, it will also better be recorded, because it will give also some variability. And also the laboratory process here, for example, what kind of processing that we use may be different. It will give different result. And how we preserve the samples, we using additive, for example, or whether it's tissue and then you do the fixation using whether it is buffer formalin or not buffer. The buffer one, it will be also different, should be recorded. And then the storage of the sample before the analysis. So before it's transport, it can be stored in, like, if it's blood, 4 degree, minus 4 degree in the refrigerator, and so on. It's all have to be recorded, and it will give the impact on these samples during the analytical process. Next slide. So this is there is some code that is used to identify the samples. For example, this one called SpPA. It's pre-analytical code to be put in the samples so that we can analyze. We can put some identifier for the sample in here, separated into fluid and solid one. So if it's, for example, this is red blood cell, then the code will be RBC. If it's some solid, for example, placenta, it will code as PLC. So this is one of the standardized code for pre-analytical analysis. Next slide. For example, for time, critical steps to transport or laboratory handling, whether it is in room temperature or in 2 to 10 degrees Celsius, it also be recorded and put code here, whether it's and it's also depend on the times. It's also need to be recorded. And also if it's tissue collections, cold ischemia or warm ischemia also need to be recorded. This is will give different quality of sample because. Next slide. Also, like the procedure of critical element, like the giving the transport temperatures, it better needs to be recorded, and then the giving the additive, for example, tissue stabilization, it could be like RNA letter or PAX-gene, or if it's tissue for pathology diagnosis, histopathological diagnosis, it could be fixation, like for whether it's formaldehyde or buffer formalin should be recorded, and then the separations or centrifugations need also to be recorded, how we process the sample, whether it's in room temperature or in certain degree, and the time also need to be recorded. So each sample will give different characteristics. Next slide. And then this is the storage sample. For example, the durations and the temperatures, how we store the sample, whether it's in room temperature, -80 on in liquid nitrogen. We also record as an identifier for the sample. Next slide. So this is how we put the SpPA code. Like for example, it is serum samples, and this is serum gel type. With this, it is 4 to 8 hour venipuncture until it was centrifuged, and then it's centrifuged in certain speed. It's code with E, and then no double spin will code for N. And if it's processed durations 2 to 8 hours at 4 degrees before it freeze, it will be coded as E, and so on. So this is type of coding that will help to harmonize the sample from one biobank to other biobank. So when researchers use these samples, they understand that the sample they use are has the same standard in how they treat the samples. So it will the sample will be not many variation, or it will be reliable, the data produced by the result. Next slide. So this is some quality in histopathology. Here the sample that we use is tissue, of course. So pre-analytical processing in histopathology could be the fixation, include the volume of the fixation fluid, the concentrations, type of fixation, whether it buffer or not, it will also give different different variations, and also time of fixations also need to be recorded. And other, for example, like how we decalcified the samples, how we cut it, how we stain it, and how we mount and also label the samples, all need to be recorded as pre-analytical processing. Next slide. So if we want to know the quality of the tissue histologically, we can evaluate the result histopathologically by read the slides. And also, if it's DNA quality from the tissue, we can measure the concentrations using nanodrop, for examples, to make sure that the quality is good. And also the RNA, usually it's used RIN score or integrated RNA integrated number score. Usually they use Agilent, or nanodrop still also be good for these evaluations of RNA quality. Also protein quality, it can be quantifications or qualifications using certain assay. Next slide. How about blood? So how we handle blood samples is also important. So if we all record it, this how we handle it will be very good. Include perhaps its sensitivity to heat, so whether it's exposed to excessive heat or not, because it can cause degradations, or whether it's exposed to light, and then how many thawing and freezing have done, and then in what store of the temperatures of the storage that we use to keep this blood before it was processed, and then whether it's frozen samples or not, because the delay itself will give a different result in analysis. Next slide. So some markers are reported to be a good candidate in detecting the quality of the blood. For example, the GGT, LDH, and also glucose, and even vitamin C and D. But still controversial for this biomarker, so still in research, actually not widely used. Next slide. And how about for urine? Basically it's also the same. We have to record everything, that it should be isolated urination during the day or during 24 hours. We should use the sterile container. We better immediate storage at minus 80 degree, for example, and the number of thawing, it also will affect the result of the analysis. Next slide. So this is like the marker for normal urine should be negative for like blood, nitrate, ketone, glucose, and so on. Next slide. So what we want to have here, that the sample in Biobank, I heard that one of our participant here, Dr. Christy, also mentioned that I want to retrieve my sample easier because in Biobank we put unique identifier in each sample, so it will be easier to retrieve the sample from the storage. There also easier to trace how the sample was processed previously. So that's why we put unique identifier in sample, so that we can detect where's the locations in our freezer, and it's linking to linking of identifier. For example, the data of the sample itself in our computers, and then labeling is also important. So each sample in Biobank should be labeled. Will be very good if it's standard label using the barcode. So it's easy to trace where is the sample locations, how many sample are left in our fridge, and so on. So everything has to be documented and recorded, including the processing, SOP, the locations, the donor of our samples, and other informations of the samples. Next slide. This is sample stabilization. I think I already mentioned about using fixative, whether it need formalin or neutral buffer or so on, or using cooling, whether it will be put on ice, in fridge, or in the freezer, and the temperatures and the delay after collection, because it will cause the tissue to have cold ischemia. Next slide. And also the transport to the biobank will be important. We have to record like what time the sample was removed from the patients, what time it received by the pathologist, for example, to be cutted, and then the temperature when it was transported, how the sample can be traced. There should be trained staff who already been trained for this kind of situations, and if there is courier, will be better, and if there is delay until it received by biobank, it also should be recorded. Next slide. Also, when we receive the sample in our biobank, we have to make record about the conditions of the package of the samples, whether it was damaged or it was nicely packaged, and then the temperature when it was brought to our biobank unit, and then whether the labels are intact, the sample was still in good conditions, and assign it to the long-term storage. Next slide. This is the processing. Processing include the centrifugations or separations. We also need to record the temperature, time, number of spin even, and sample collection in what kind of analyte, whether it's in buffy, serum, plasma, or other type, or even it's nucleic acid type. Next slide. So for long-term storage, we need to make sure that our collection is safe and is secure. I mean that not everyone can access this our storage of samples, and then the temperature control of our freezer need to be checked regularly. Yeah. Temperatures should be monitored, and like the freeze-thaw cycles also be recorded. And then how it's in our country, it will be very important because we often have blackout. It's many times, so backup on the electricity and power, it will be important. And then we have to consider also our storage regarding the light, humidity, fire, fluid, explosions. It is for like security, and aliquot should also be recorded in our fridge. And yeah, well, everything should be recorded actually. Next slide. This is quality of the samples. I think I already mentioned about this, the pre-analytical variable one, including the time of transport, processing, temperatures, and also period of freezing. Next slide. Yeah, for this quality control, there is definitions that quality assurance is more to focus on the process. It wants to make sure whether your what you do is the right things according to the best practice, and the quality control is more to product that the result that you want is what you expected. Thank you for the